today, got kind of a little special treat for you. It's kind of, you guys are all Revit users. You guys know about the software. If you don't already use it, I'm sure you will at some point get engaged with it. So I wanted to give you guys a presentation on, 20 years, 21 years after, the start of the software and where we are today and how it came to be. And there are things specifically on the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and piping side of things, as well as the architecture and structural things that we can take advantage of. So today's presentation is about the history of Revit and how to supercharge it. I am fortunate enough to be your guest host today for ATG. My name is Jay Ayala. I'm located in the Pacific Northwest. It is my privilege and my pleasure to be here with you today. Let's talk about the history of Revit and how to supercharge it. All right. So you're well aware of what Revit's capabilities are. It is a building information modeler. And, we can create some extremely sophisticated architecture out there. As you saw those first two images, we can get some, near photorealistic type quality renderings out of it. Not only can we make beautiful 3D representations, virtual representations of real world buildings and everything that's in it, but we can get construction documents out of it as well. And it's all predicated off of this amazing concept that is all parametric. And if you make a change, that kind of propagates throughout. What you may not be aware of is that this solution for architects, it has its origins in manufacturing. Manufacturing, that's right. So how did this come to be, right? We've got an architectural parametric modeler. How did we get that from the manufacturing industry? Manufacturing has a unique challenge. They need to make lots of parts for different things, right? You think about an engine, for example, in your automobiles. Those are lots and lots of different parts, but they're all kind of similar and they just have to flex the sizes of them, right? So that's kind of the same philosophy that was adopted for Revit. So I want to introduce you to two men in particular. I want to introduce you to Erwin and Leonid. Okay, so these two guys, they're the man. They're awesome. And Leonid, I'll give you a little personal history on him, a little bio there. So he was a software developer. He worked for PTC. PTC developed in the mid-90s this software called Pro Engineer. It's an amazing manufacturing solution. So he started as a programmer, but then he worked his way up to VP of development. And along with Erwin was a mathematician who also worked at PTC in the mid-90s. Erwin kind of made the software do all of the algorithms that programmed all the algorithms that would kind of make things work properly. Now, these two gentlemen, what they did that was unique and different was Leonid had this idea that he was pitching to upper management at PTC saying, hey, we should do this. We should repeat its success that we have with Pro Engineer, but we should make a new software called Pro Architecture. Pro Architect, right? And the upper management, they were like, you know what? We're killing it right now with our software. We don't want to rock the boat. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. So that little inception of an idea that grew in Leonid's mind, it just like that movie, right? With Leonardo DiCaprio, that thing just kind of grew and grew. And he just wasn't satisfied with what he was doing. He knew that there was a market, an underdeveloped market that was hungry for this solution, this parametric modeling solution. And at the time, AutoCAD architecture, or known at that time as architectural desktop, was showing some promise. It was actually outpacing, AutoCAD in the AEC industry. So he just wasn't satisfied. He has a conversation with Erwin one day, tells him, hey, we should do this. And Erwin's like, yeah, we should, right? And in 1997, they made a bold decision. They lined up all their ducks in a row and they left PTC together. They found some venture capitalists to fund their project and they went to go make Revit. They went to go make it on their own. They founded their own little company. And this is the wrong logo, guys, but this is the closest I could get to, called Charles River Software. And they started working on developing the software. Leonid, Erwin as the two main people, but they also had a team of people working with them to do this. Can't ever do anything great on your own, right? So they brought in the right people, and a few short years later, about 2.5 years later, they were ready to release their software. And at the same time that they released their software, their flagship product in the year 2000, I don't know if you guys are Conan O'Brien fans, but I was. Anyway, in the year 2000, they released their software. They call it Revit, and they renamed their company to coincide with the name of their flagship product. They rename it Revit Technologies. Now, at the time in 2000, this is now 3 years on from when they started, AutoCAD architecture, architectural desktop as it was known then, Autodesk was, man, that was their cash cow. They were making so much money selling AutoCAD, I keep doing that, architectural desktop. They would sell it to anyone and everyone. They would sell it to people who just needed AutoCAD LT, right? They didn't even do architecture. They were selling AutoCAD architecture to everyone. It was an amazing product for Autodesk at the time, and it was incredibly successful. It surpassed their #1 selling Autodesk product, which happens to be, and even to this day, AutoCAD LT. Oh, and just a little trivia here. LT doesn't stand for light, okay? Bonus, if anybody can guess what LT stands for, go ahead and put that in the chat. All right, so AutoCAD LT's biggest selling product that Autodesk ever had, AutoCAD architecture. Although it didn't do the number of seats in sales, it did do revenue, way more revenue with AutoCAD architecture than AutoCAD LT, even though AutoCAD LT was the most volume sales. Pardon me. Okay, so where do we go from here, right? So with the introduction of Revit, it was incredibly disruptive, incredibly disruptive. Everybody in the architecture industry started to take notice. Why? Well, it was because of something that the company founded themselves in, which was the user feedback. So even before they released the software, they were getting feedback from architects, and the architects would tell them, hey, it would be nice if we could do A, B, and C. So they would go and work on it and the other thing is they were extremely accessible to the public. One of my good friends who started out Revit, I think release 1, his name is Scott Davis, works for Autodesk. I worked with him for 11 years at Autodesk myself. I believe his username is Mr. Revit in the Yagi forums. So he was stunned at how easy it was to get a hold of all of these developers. And the way that they would implement whatever it was, the feedback that they were getting, part of it was that they needed features, but the other thing is that they were very responsive. And that in itself made things very, very disruptive, as you can imagine, for Autodesk. Now, the reason I've circled this date, guys, is in February 2002, on the 21st of February 2002, Autodesk decides enough with the disruption. We need to understand and come to a decision here that this is the software of the future. Now, that was the right call, because you look at the industry today, had Autodesk not bought Revit, we might not even be here, right? So Autodesk acquires the software. They understand the disruptive, they understand what the future is, and they go ahead and purchase the software. Now, what Autodesk does, they do really well. They buy software, they sit on it for a little bit, they develop it, but they spend some extra time and care with the development of Revit. And in 2004, they renamed the software and they re-release it as Revit Architecture. They added the architecture. We kind of thought that was weird in 2004. Now, this was a very compelling product for all of the architectural design firms that were out there, because now it's Autodesk, right? They've been using AutoCAD for years. They know Autodesk. So this then becomes this amazing snowball effect where Autodesk is now developing and releasing and supporting the software. And in 2005, the very next year, Autodesk does something that now you start to see a trend. They release a new Revit product, Revit Structure. Now, this is for the structural disciplines. It's a completely separate product from Revit architecture. And on the heels of that in 2006, which is when I joined Autodesk back then, I no longer work for them. I'm now for ATG. However, they release this product called Autodesk AutoCAD Revit Series Systems Plus. Okay, so this happens to be only the second longest product name in all of Autodesk software history, only the second longest. And in 2007, Autodesk releases the longest software product name that they've ever released in the entire history of Autodesk. And that is Autodesk AutoCAD Revit Series Systems Plus 2. That's the longest one. So they then realized we probably shouldn't have that really long name, and we probably shouldn't include AutoCAD in the name. We should just call it Revit MEP. So this happened in 2008. I believe it was 2008. And the interesting thing is that in 2009, so 3 years on, now they've got architecture, they've got structure, and they have MEP. 3 years later, something amazing happens. One of the generals for the US Army Corps of Engineers, I forget his name. So he's in charge of all of the civilian and the private sector contracts who help the US Army Corps with architectural, mechanical, civil services. So he's in charge of managing all those contracts to develop the bases, things like barracks, gymnasiums, cafeterias, offices, training grounds. So all of these buildings that are being done, they're being done in this new building information modeling world. Okay. And what he does is he takes a really bold step. And in 2009, he declares as Revit as the de facto building information modeling product of choice for the US Army Corps. And so a lot of things happen in that time period, right? So we're talking about a software that was released in 2000. 9 years later, it becomes 2 years later, it's one of the most disruptive software packages that Autodesk has ever seen. And then a short time after that, 7 years later, it becomes the de facto building information modeling software. That is incredibly impressive. And Leonid and Erwin, they were right. There was a market there that needed the software. And AutoCAD, sorry, I keep doing that, Architectural Desktop proved that that was in fact the case. Later with Revit and being released into the market and the adoption, I mean, you can't hardly find any architectural firms who aren't using Revit anymore. So now that you've seen the history, let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of the software, okay? So the philosophy comes from how to think about Revit. So for those of you who are on the architectural side, for those of you who are familiar with Revit, you will know that when you have Revit, you've got a floor plan, you got a 3D view, you got a section. You're actually, no matter what view you're looking at, you're still dealing with a 3D model, okay? Even if it looks like a plan view, or even if it looks like a section, that is still a 3D model. And if you make a change in the section, it's going to go all the way back up to your sheets, right? That have schedules on them, all of that updates. So as soon as you make a change in one place, it instantly shows the differences everywhere. And that's where the name of the software comes from, okay? When you make a change and it revises instantly, that was the philosophy, which then becomes the name of the software. So if you take away anything from my presentation today, this should be it, right? That's the name of the software. That's where it comes from. It comes from the philosophy of how it's used. All right. So when you think about how architecture works, you're working on a 3D model, you're doing your design intent. Now, architects go to school so that they can understand design, and create these beautiful works of art. In my opinion, some of them are amazing. What they don't get taught, and one of the reasons that one thing that they don't go to school for, rather, is they don't go to school to become draftspeople and drafting and computer stuff. They don't go to school for that. But in the AutoCAD world, they kind of have to learn that side of it. And this is where Revit is different. You're going to work on your design intent primarily. And then the construction documents, they fall out as part of the design process. And this image, when I first saw this, I thought that this captured that beautifully. And I wish there was a higher res image. Maybe one of you guys can volunteer and help me make this a higher res image. But you can see that the 3D model floating around there in blue, it creates that directly underneath it, that floor plan. Behind it, you can see that you've got an elevation, an exterior elevation kind of projecting backwards. And then from the side, you can see the other elevation, the side elevation view. So this image captures that that design, get in the mind frame of design, but the construction documents fall out as part of the process. Of course, you have to spend some time and create the sheets and do all that stuff. But this is something that we can take advantage of on the architectural side. And it's very compelling for them. On the structure side, this is a little bit different. And the reason it's compelling for the structure is just slightly different. So traditionally, you have to create the construction documents in a separate analytical model in your analytical calculation software of choice. And where Revit changed this back in 2005, 2006, is not only can you do the 3D model and coordinate with the Revit architecture to have the spatial coordination, but it was bidirectional. You could actually take the analytical beams and columns and beam systems and everything that was related to the structure, the framing, and you could actually export that to an analytical software, run the numbers, and then bring it back in. Okay, perfect. Lionel, we got a message that popped up here. Lionel, thank you so much. Yeah, so here's what Lionel is saying is, I thought I remember a reseller saying it stood for revise iteratively. Oh my gosh, I cannot get that word out. Iteratively. There we go. Revise iteratively. Oh my God. The concept is the same, Lionel. Whether it's revise instantly or revise iteratively, concept's the same, buddy. Yep, we can figure on either way. Perfect. Okay, so going along with what we were talking about with Revit structure, with Revit structure, because we can round trip that to the analytical software and bring it back in, we can update the structural sizes automatically without having to go back and do all of the construction documents, label them properly, and make sure that you're doing the manual transfer of data from your analytical to your construction documents. If you can send this out, crunch the numbers, and bring it back in, have Revit automatically update the sizes of the beams and the columns, then that's perfect, right? So that just cuts so much time out. That's why it's compelling for the structural industry. And then if we continue on with this, why is it compelling for the MEP industry? Well, now that we have a full architectural 3D coordinated model with a structure, we can bring in our systems. Not only can we do that and spatially coordinate everything, but we can now start running calculations, things like plumbing, fixture calculations as to, what is the sizes of the lines that have to be produced. Things like ductwork, sizing, things like the conduits, sorry, not the conduits, the conductors, right? So we can start to apply a lot of the intelligence that an engineer would typically have to do. On the electrical side, it's very compelling as well, because you can have your entire electrical distribution system right within that model, including the very last switch, outlet, lighting fixture, all of the power needs necessary for the project. And we hadn't had that. We hadn't had a full solution like that, maybe with the exception of, oh man, Autodesk Building Systems, which then became AutoCAD MEP. However, even then it was AutoCAD, it was file-based. You had to have an electrical project database. It just wasn't one overall file. It had its challenges. For those of you who know that software, you know what I mean. So those are the things that make this software compelling to each of these. Now, where we can supercharge it, even though we've got these solutions for each of the disciplines, it doesn't really solve everything for all of those disciplines. There's still a lot of work that you have to do. And that's where some of these tools that I'm going to highlight now from CAD Technology Center, CTC, they're add-ins that you can put into Revit that really help go a long ways, right? So with Revit, we might be thinking, you know, we can do it all. The reality is Revit, it does it all, but it's all manual. You have to do it. And in 2009, right, as a lot of this stuff was being developed, also Autodesk released the first API. So this is a .NET programming application that you can put into Revit. So what Revit really does is it exposes hooks. It exposes these hooks that allow the .NET programs to plug in there, right? Now, it was awesome. And third-party developers could use those API hooks to develop little utilities here and there. In 2015, we saw the release of computational BIM with Dynamo. Now, Dynamo takes that a next step further. It's a visual programming language rather than a .NET, syntax type of language. And what it allows us to do, those two things allow us to create plugins that are very useful for us. So here what you're looking at, this is Revit with the CTC software. This is the plotter and exporter tool. So this tool makes it very easy for us to go in and say, okay, I want to be able to plot PDF. I want to be able to do DWGs, DXF, Navisworks. I want to extract all these things with one push of a button, right? So as you can see in the right pane over there, you can set everything that you want, and then you can hit run now. So this is something I would typically do at the end of the day before I'm going to bounce and head home for the evening. Or you can schedule it to run whenever you want, as long as your PC is on overnight. So that's a little bit on the plotter and exporter utility. I remember doing PDF sets and then also doing the extraction for Navisworks. I've done that so many times in my career coming from Revit, that when I saw this utility, this was really the solution that Revit should have come with to begin with, right? It should automatically do all this stuff. It should run and you should be able to set this up and let it run overnight even, right? So there's a utility here, one of many that you can take advantage of. That was just one, okay? So this would really, between those and the other utilities, it's going to help you speed up all of your Revit production and the output that you need to have as well. Okay, so let's talk about a customer profile. So I met Arthur during my Autodesk days. I worked at Autodesk from 2006 to 2017. I had an 11-year run there, and it was over a quarter of my lifetime. It still is. I'm only 43. Had an 11-year run at Autodesk, and while I was there, I lived in the Portland, Oregon metro area. I went to visit Waterleaf Architecture. Waterleaf Architecture, they're actually an architectural firm, and I covered the MEP side of the software. Now, when I walked into Waterleaf Architecture for the first time I ever visited them, I think it was in 2012. I can't exactly remember. So when I walked in, you go into their lobby area, you approach the reception desk, and along the wall in this lobby area are these beautiful works of art. So Arthur was literally hand rendering the drawings of the buildings that Waterleaf Architecture had worked on over the years. And he had been there for many, many years, decades. So he had almost all of the important Portland skyline buildings. He had some of them were watercolors, some of them were just black and white charcoal. He was just amazing with this. This was a photo of where they're located. This is their building. They're on the second floor. That big window that you see facing that caddy corner there, that chamfered corner of the building there, that's their that's their conference room. I love their office. It's so cool. Everything is glass, and the ductwork penetrates through perfectly cut out circles in the glass to get through. It's the coolest thing. I've never seen that before. I loved the way that their architectural design studio looked. It just had a real architecture studio feel, right? It's amazing. Now, Arthur, he's not a technology guy. He is not. I told you he did these hand-drawn renderings, right? He still does work architecture, but he's still on a draft, literally a drafting table with a T-square and everything, right? So he's still doing that. He doesn't understand computers. He doesn't understand email. I've emailed him so many times. I've never once had a response. And that's not to say that, he doesn't know how. It's just he has his way, right? Now, when I introduced the concept of Revit from an MEP perspective, they had already been using it on the architectural side of things. Arthur was in that meeting when I went there, and he didn't engage with the younger architects. He didn't engage with Revit back then. But after my meeting, something with him changed. Okay. And he later, like a couple years later, I went and visited them, and he said something shocking to me. I never thought I would have seen this, but he was like, you know what? I really like Revit. So he'd been using it. He got himself a computer. The IT guy had to get him a computer so he could use Revit, because he didn't use his, right? It was stored in the drawer. I think he even said it got lost at one time, but he started using the computer so that he could do Revit. And what he said to me was, I like Revit because it thinks the way that I think. And I just, from an architectural perspective, seeing the artwork that was on the walls, to hear him say that about Revit, that was something very interesting. I've never heard that before. I haven't heard it since, but even to this day, he still doesn't do email, but he's on Revit. So it's an interesting concept with what Revit capabilities are. Fortunately, there's a lot of different solutions in there that involve, the built-in functionality. As I mentioned, everything is in there. A lot of it is manual. And that's where, if you can supercharge it with using, these little single tools from CTC software. There's a lot of them. There's different types. I hope today's presentation was helpful and useful to you, if not just informative and entertaining. With that, I want to open up the floor for any kind of questions. Feel free to type in the chat, but if you got to run, you got to run. So feel free to stay and chat for a while. If not, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure and a privilege to do this presentation for you. And let's go ahead and see if there's any chat here, any chat messages. All right, guys, there's no chat messages, not a big deal. I'm going to hang out for a couple minutes and see if maybe anybody else has any comments that they want to add. If not, I appreciate your time and attention, and enjoy your day. Okay, we got a question from Palmer. Revit City and other advanced things? No. Palmer, I'm having trouble understanding the question here. Revit City and other advanced things? No. Wonder what he means by that. Oh, Lionel, no, you didn't interrupt, buddy. You're fine. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. You're fine. Others as well. Okay, what was LT? Okay, yeah, so HAP, what was LT? So LT is a software term that stands for limited technology. Limited technology. So Revit LT, there's also Revit LT. You can't do work sharing in there. You can't do structure. Sorry, you can't do mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and piping in there. It's limited technology, Revit LT. AutoCAD LT is similar. AutoCAD LT, you can't do all of the functionality like load list routines and, do the automated stuff. Yeah, so LT stands for limited technology. And if you hear people calling it light, I know you understand what they're saying. But really it's limited technology. And the reason it is, it's just they don't put the entire software in there. It's kind of like clipping yourself at the knees if you're going to use an LT product. But, you know, sometimes that's good enough. Sometimes limited technology is good enough to get you what you need. Oh, Palmer, your wrist is broken. Sorry, buddy. Yeah, I'm recovering from a hip injury myself. Okay, so Palmer's wrist is broken. He was probably trying to type something else. He said earlier, Revit City and other advanced things, no. And then he says others as well. I still don't understand the question, Palmer. Okay, guys, thanks again. I really appreciate your time and attention. Okay, so Palmer says, I just recall how Revit City participants advanced families. Yeah, so Revit City, I think it's still available. Let's see, is it still available? Let me bring up Google here. Revit City. Oh, let me expand this. Revit City, yeah, it's still there. We should be able to download content and families there as well. Most of the time, what I'm doing, guys, is if I need a specific piece of content, I do a lot of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and piping. I don't necessarily do things like furniture for architecture, but when I need a specific piece of content, and just last week I was looking for a horizontal split case pump from Bell and Gossett. I actually went to their website. I'm finding that for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and piping, a lot of the manufacturers are in fact providing Revit files, which I don't always trust them, and I have to put connectors in them, but it's a good starting point, right? So at least for the graphics, it's a good starting point. Let me put that on mute. Sorry, guys. I thought I had my phone muted. Perfect. Okay, guys, again, thank you so much. Enjoy your day. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. I'm going to sign off. Mahalo.